Welcome to Elevating Consciousness, the podcast that brings you mind-expansive conversations into the heart of what matters most. I'm your host, Artem, and our guest today is Daniel Thorson, a former monastic, podcaster, writer, and coach. He spent 5 years as a resident at the Monastic Academy and has accumulated 2 years of silent retreat experience. Daniel is also a certified Aletheia Coach and Circling facilitator, whose work weaves together embodied inquiry, attachment-based healing, philosophical exploration, and relational presence. For many years, Daniel hosted the Emerge podcast, a pioneering platform that helped catalyze emergent dialogues and shape what many now call the liminal web. He currently writes The Intimate Mirror on Substack, a publication exploring meaning, transformation, intimacy, and the search for religion in the age of artificial intelligence. In this episode, we speak about Daniel's extensive experience living and training at a monastery, turning breakdowns into breakthroughs, developing a better relationship with conceptuality and rationality, secure attachment with reality, leaving Buddhism, creating a Dharma capable of addressing the meta-crisis, and many other resonant threads on personal and collective transformation. Enjoy. Daniel Thorson, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's great to be here.
Yeah, it's good to have you. And before we dive in, I'd like to set some context. And we first met in Monastic Academy back in July 2021. So it's almost 4 years ago now. I think at the time when we met, I didn't realize you were the host of the Emerge podcast. And I think slowly then I kind of pieced it together. And I actually think that I first heard of Monastic Academy on your podcast. I think you had a chat with Soryu. And I also want to mention kind of my own gateway into the liminal web was probably through Rebel Wisdom. But if we take a step back and look at a handful of podcasts and people that helped kick off the liminal web in its early days, I definitely think you're on that list. And you've had your finger on the pulse of what's been kind of emerging around leading edge thought on human transformation. And I just want to acknowledge you for that. And I also want to kind of speak to a couple of shared threads that I see on our journey. We both did the Circling SAS facilitator training with Circling Europe. They're called Transformational Connection now. And we did the Aletheia Coach training with Steve March.
That's right. Yeah.
And you've mentioned Dan Brown as an influence, especially his work around attachment. And it's kind of funny because a couple of months after I got back from Monastic Academy, I did my first online retreat with Dan.
Oh, did you? Cool. Thanks.
And since then, I've been working with his main student, Dustin DePerna, as my meditation teacher. And
Amazing.
Yeah, and I also had Dan's co-author on the attachment textbook, David Elliott, on my podcast a while back.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah. And I guess another major influence for both of us is Rob Rebea. You reference him often. And honestly, I think that the only books I've read more than Seeing That Freeze are some children's books that I read to my kids.
That's beautiful to hear. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, we've also interviewed many of the same guests on our podcast. So I kind of just wanted to name some of these commonalities. But I also want to point to one clear difference in our paths, which is you've had the experience of living as a monastic for quite some time, and I haven't. And I think after some of my psychedelic experiences, I definitely felt a pull toward that kind of intensive contemplative training. But I ended up getting married and having kids. So that's something that
That's your
never happened.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, that never happened for me. So, so with all that said, I'd love to start this conversation by hearing a bit more about your monastic training. What did it entail? What do you feel has been afforded through it? And maybe more specifically, do you believe that there's some deeper insights or realizations that are only accessible through this kind of prolonged monastic container, or maybe there's at least some kind of acceleration of insight, like what may take 10 years of practice as a householder could be maybe touched in 2 years in a monastic setting. Kind of curious to hear a little more about what that was like for you.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And I've been following your work and really appreciating your conversations. I've listened to a number of them and could feel the kind of resonance between our interests and path. And so it's really fun to be here in conversation with you. Yeah. I mean, I think one thing that I have learned over the years is that different people are different, right? And so what is appropriate context and space for one person's transformation is actually going to block up and get somebody stuck. Same space, same teachings, different impact. And so I don't know that I can speak in generalities, but I will say that for me and many others at Maple, it can be really hard. And part of the reason that I myself went to Maple is that I found myself living the life of a layperson, knowing what I ought to do, practice, act ethically, all the things. And yet I would just not do that. I would doom scroll and I would act in ways that I wasn't proud of. I would engage in addictive behavior. And I just couldn't really stop myself. And, in part that was because our culture is so wacky. And in part, so I just needed help. I needed help. And I was, I think, finally adequately humiliated by my own inability to kind of walk the path on my own, that I chose to go to the Monastic Academy. And for me, the main benefit was just being in a context and being around people who are all orienting towards the same kind of values and vision and prayer. And being embedded in that context over time, it does take a long time. That's why I was there for years. It kind of slowly changes your core operating system and set of values that you're orienting from. And that's, I think, quite different than most people's experience, going into a weekend retreat or taking psychedelics, where you get like a glimpse of a different way. And then you go back into your life, and that different way is, for many folks that I talk to, quickly occluded by the immensity of the system that is out of integrity with that different way. And so, I think to build a different culture and to like embody a different culture, it really is a team effort. It takes a lot of people. It takes a lot of infrastructure, we might say, to allow that to really robustly emerge in the life. And then there's another piece, which is like, I have a friend, Nate Vanderpool, who would always talk about like the skill of the player and the difficulty of the game, right? The system that we live in right now can be thought of as a very difficult game in which to live according to goodness, truth, and beauty, I would argue. And so therefore, you need to really gather up, you need to become a very skillful player to play in that arena. And I think for me, that required a long period of dedicated practice. I think different people have different karma. Like I've met like freaking like 20-year-olds that I think are more on the ball than I am. So maybe there's also like I don't know how this works. There's just like, some people seem just like spiritual geniuses. I am not. And so I needed a lot of help and a lot of time to cook. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And yeah, I mean, it seems like the main piece was like having this environment in this community. And when you were in the environment that you were at before, it's like it didn't have those pieces. So now coming into this, there's a certain culture that's there that kind of, the environment makes it easier it affords a certain way of living that's not afforded at home, where you don't have kind of that structure and that scaffolding there.
Yeah. And, I was raised in a secular materialist household. I was just not given many tools to reorient my life. So I read these books and I tried my best, but I couldn't do it.
Yeah, I guess I got a couple of more questions into this. I guess when you were going in, were you planning for it to be like a long-term thing? How were you maybe imagining it, and how did it end up being maybe different?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of sharing my perspective now on the other side of having done like almost 6 years of this kind of training. When I went in originally, and I went in 2 times. So the first time I went and I trained for 2 years, I left for about 1.5 years, and then I went back for 4 years or something like that, roughly. The first time that I went to Maple, I was extremely arrogant. So I would not have described myself as, helpless and unable to make it in the world in this way, like to live in integrity. I thought I knew how to meditate. I thought I was like great. I thought that I had gotten stream entry. I thought that I was like really good at meditating. And it took a lot of work by Soryu, the teacher there, to just rip that away from me. And I'm so grateful for that, because I had built an identity around meditation that was making it very hard to be intimate with myself, the world, with other people. And, I know I did that in order to create some semblance of safety and feeling okay about myself. But, I when I originally went, I went because I thought like this will be a place where I can, I don't know, be seen and celebrated for how awesome I am or something like that. It was very, very arrogant. It was the second time that I went that I had been thoroughly humiliated. And then when I went back the second time, I thought that I was going to be there for my whole life. That was actually how I was orienting to it. It didn't work out that way, but that was my intention.
Yeah. And then, so now you've left that kind of, you left that behind
2 years ago, or 2.5 years ago, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so did you feel like what you needed to get from that environment, from that structure, you've kind of got, and you've maybe gotten to a point where like, okay, I've gotten what I need, and now my journey moves on where I can do other things somewhere else?
To a certain degree. I mean, I think there's, as like in the interior, an infinite amount of learning that can happen. It's endless, as far as I can tell, which is beautiful and also scary at times. But I think more it's the case that where I was being called could no longer fit within the context of Maple. Like my creative work, my uniqueness kind of couldn't quite find right purchase within that field.
Yeah, no. Yeah, that makes sense. So I guess I want to touch on your first article, and I've really been enjoying your writing on the Intimate Mirror. And I mean, it seems to have been buzzing it seems like a lot of other people are also enjoying it. And your first article on your Substack is titled "When Love Breaks Open." Mm-hmm. And it speaks about like a type of psychological breakdown that you had, maybe like a dark night of the soul. You mentioned not being able to speak or even make the simplest decisions for several months. Sounds like a very difficult period in your life.
It was very difficult. Yeah.
Yeah. And, I'm wondering if you could speak more about this. Like, did this occur after you left the monastery? Did you have similar experiences to this during your stay at the monastery? You also mentioned in some of your other pieces the importance of safety, and that for us to really open to our pain and trauma, we need to feel safe. Do you feel like part of what allowed this experience to unfold was the fact that you were in a safe environment?
Yeah. I mean, so many different causes and conditions definitely contributed to like this falling apart. Looking back on it, certainly my training at Maple, which I think built a system that was able to hold a certain kind of intensity of like dissolution and suffering, and like, working through all the sort of like layers of structure that maybe hid that pain, is the way I would say it now. What tipped me over into it was actually a romantic entanglement. So there was a woman that I fell in love with, and she was basically unavailable. And the kind of quality of pain that emerged in that, I somehow managed to be with in a way where it was seen and felt and understood. And something in the alchemy of that shattered my world and produced a kind of opening of consciousness unlike any that I've ever experienced before, which was then followed by this profound dissolution. I think because many of the structures were in a moment kind of seen through. And then all of the underlying pain, as I understand it now, is kind of, or as a way of seeing it might be that all that underlying pain was kind of reaching out now for connection, for contact, for attunement, for presence. And there was a lot. There was a lot of pain down there, as I think actually there is for many of us. It seems to me that most human beings in our culture are kind of, have a surface personality, and then underneath that, there's a deep well of hidden pain. And that's, I think one way of understanding our situation. Maybe I'll say that. I think I missed some elements of your question, but if there's ones you want to.
Yeah. I guess I'm curious, did this happen after you left the monastery? Yeah. It sounds like it happened after. This was fairly recently.
Yeah, this is about like a year after I left, a little bit less than a year after I left the monastery. So it's been about a 2 years since that breakdown, I think. Or a year since that breakdown, 2 years since I left the monastery. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. And you never experienced anything like that, doing like long retreats and stuff like that?
I did not to that degree. I think, if I reflect on it, I think at times during my solitary retreats in particular, I would enter into similar territory, but I wasn't, for whatever reason, I didn't feel safe enough to like fully let go into it. And I think in this last go around, I did, and I'm not sure why. It might just have been like right timing. It may be because I'm held in a community and circle of friends that I really trust. It may also be because I just feel more devoted to truth than I think I ever have before in my life. And that's in part because of the creative work I'm doing and the circle of friendship that kind of mirrors that back to me and holds me there. But I don't know, to some degree, it's a mystery to me, like why this time I kind of fell through. Whereas other times I kind of resisted and then kind of popped back out.
Yeah. And do you feel like through this experience, this is where like a lot of this, like work that you're doing right now, the writing, do you feel like maybe like all these pieces were there floating around right through all these years of doing this intensive training, and then it like kind of breaks down and everything all this creativity flows out?
That's exactly my experience. I mean, it all flowed out of that breakdown and kind of breakthrough. And I will say another piece that I should mention here, just for the sake of listeners, is I also found during this breakdown process the ideal parent figure protocol, which I've written about, and I think you probably know from Daniel P. Brown's work, and the kind of frame of like early attachment wounding really helped me relate to what it was that was kind of coming up. It was both as just a way of seeing, but also in terms of practice, it was very helpful, very, very helpful. So that was a difference that I think made a big difference too. I didn't have that at Maple.
Yeah, and that to me is like a really interesting piece, that's a fairly new discovery for you. Like you've done all this other stuff, yet like this kind of foundational, like what's foundational to our psyche and to our development of self and how we relate is something that's come after.
I wish it weren't the case. I wish I had encountered it much earlier. I mean, Daniel P. Brown, as I imagine you may know, prescribed ideal parent figure protocol as a kind of preliminary practice for Westerners who wanted to meditate. And so I wouldn't recommend doing it in quite the order that I did, but I did learn a lot. And it's part of, as you say, I think what gives me the creative voice that I have is the way that it unfolded for me. But yeah, I mean, I think ideal parent figure protocol, I recommend it for most people. I think it's an incredible technology.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the path is messy, but through walking that path, and through the path that you walk, you could kind of illuminate some of the pitfalls and help contribute to creating a Dharma that's better for people. And I actually remember first hearing about Dan Brown and Ideal Parent Protocol, and it was actually during like a Zen retreat that I did. This was right this was right before COVID was starting. And I remember doing it, right? And I was like trying to like imagine ideal parent. And I'm like, oh, like I feel like my childhood was like perfect. You know, like I couldn't like tap into any of that. And I was telling the Zen master, and he's like, oh, like, you know, you have this smile, like maybe you had a great childhood. And like, you know, it was only through work later on that I was kind of able to see some of the things that, you know, were missing and some of the needs that weren't met. So it's just interesting how like that's not always accessible. And there's like a lot of layers that sometimes have to be seen through before we get to that underlying kind of pain.
100%. Yeah. Yeah. And that's often where what I see with clients is they're just actually not yet ready to face the failures of love that in fact characterized their childhood. And that's, I think, one of the strategies, kind of coping strategies that we use is do we kind of paper over that and think like, oh, that was actually great. Because it's so painful to directly meet the ways that we weren't attuned to, loved as we ought to be as little babies.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, I guess what you're saying now is kind of related to this. There is this, we have these defensive mechanisms, and a lot of these kind of defensive mechanisms can be like rationalizing, intellectualizing. And, you know, that's a thread that runs through your writing, is this kind of idea of hyper rationality, this left brain dominant way of seeing the world that's prevalent in our culture, and perhaps in many of the spaces that we inhabit, where, you know, people are trying to do this kind of work, but there's still kind of this emphasis on the intellectual stuff. And, you know, this topic's been very relevant to me in recent years. And I guess it would be really interesting to hear, what has your process been in developing a better relationship with conceptuality and rationality? How do you see the intellectual and the more kind of emotional relational development coming together?
Yeah, it's a beautiful question. I think my practice, one of the kind of core principles is just sensitivity, right? So what does it feel like? Differentiating between what it feels like to conceptualize out of a place of fear and defensiveness versus out of exploration and curiosity and eros, right? So there's a core differentiation, which I imagine you know from Rob Berbea, between clinging and eros. That feels different in the body. So it feels different to play with concept from a position of safety and love than it does to use concepts to defend our pain. It just does feel different. And clarifying that difference is very helpful. And then, you know, encouraging and a kind of devotion to using concepts in a way that is aligned with love. Right? Like I am committed to that because I know from my own life and from my childhood how painful it can be for myself and others to use concepts in a way that is kind of defensive and protective and separative. And so, you know, that's a big piece. And if we really take on that view, like, there's a difference, many people may see how often it is the case that they use concepts in that way, and that can again create the conditions for a kind of breakdown. So it's a useful way of seeing in that. It sets us up for opening to all that which we've run from, because most of us are quite addicted to using concepts defensively.
Yeah, I guess like the piece that stands out for that is that there has to be a ability to sense what we're feeling, because that's like primary, right?
Exactly.
See, where is it coming from?
Exactly. Yeah. And that's why safety is so important. And that's the core of like the coaching practice I do, is to kind of create a space where we can do that slow, deep work of just seeing what is true, right? What's deeper here? Like, whoa, what's my body saying? Can I listen to it and give it room to start to articulate itself in movement and image and felt sense, and making space for that in our current culture is not trivial, right? Like that's a very different kind of space than most people are in all the other time of their life. So exactly, that's right. That kind of sensitivity, that kind of intelligence, that kind of deep listening. One of my mentors, who I know you know, Doug Tatterin, talks about alexithymia, the complete inability that people have to name and acknowledge their emotional experience. It's rampant in our culture. People are not taught how to listen to their experience in such a way that they can even begin to differentiate between these two styles of thinking, like where they're coming from. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I also had Doug on early on the podcast, so
cool.
I'm familiar with his work. And yeah, I mean, also like what kind of the memory that's coming up for me is I remember first coming to a monastic academy, coming to Maple, and I remember you were giving a talk on something. I don't remember exactly what it was. It was something to do with ethics, I think. But yeah, there was this like emphasis on like, oh, it's important to actually know what we're feeling, what is the emotion, because that's kind of driving the concepts and the thoughts. And I've read so much about emotion, so many books, and I remember coming to Maple and engaging in some of the emotional work and learning the practice of circling, and like having this, I was, I think 33 at the time, and just kind of having this realization like, whoa, now I'm an adult and I'm finally learning how to understand my own emotions, how to work with them. And yeah, it was just like this realization of like, I couldn't just do it from reading books. Like I had to be in relationship, and I had to be around other people that were maybe had more training and more skill in that they can kind of show me things I wasn't seeing. But yeah, that was just kind of like a memory that really stood out for me.
Yeah. And that's exactly it. I think so much of this is transmitted in relationship, right? And because if you try to access these deeper movements outside of relationships of safety, and often outside of relationships where the other person is also attempting to do that and even has succeeded in kind of opening these territories more, you will activate people. Like they'll get triggered and they'll respond in a way that often makes it an unsafe place to do that exploration. And so, this is why the cultivation of places like Maple or other training environments are so critical in order to transition culture. Because as I write about, and as you mentioned, like safety is in some ways like the fundamental ground of the work. And once you start to take on that sense, it's like you see how unsafe so much of the spaces we move in are. And so it makes sense why we would accumulate all of these defensive patternings to protect ourselves. And why we'd have to go through deep training to become like ongoingly safe enough to live from depth in this world.
Yeah. And, I'm also thinking about circling and these kind of relational practices. And, you've done these practices for a long time. And like when I came to Maple, you actually had this circling retreat, and that's where I first learned this practice. And at the time when I was planning to go to Maple, I just kind of wanted to go meditate. But it so happened that there was this emotional processing and circling retreat, like in the middle of that time frame when I was going to be there.
Yeah.
And and I was like, oh, this sounds cool. Like that's not really what I want to do, but this sounds like something I'd be interested in. And it ended up being like this. Oh, like this is what I've been missing from my life. Like I always wanted to have more intimate and more honest conversations with friends, and I just never knew how to do it. And then coming and like getting a taste of this practice was just like, wow.
Yeah.
And then being able to do it, like afterwards I left and I, kept practicing on, it was called, I think Circle Anywhere at the time. It's called Relateful now. So I've been practicing there. And then I ended up doing a 6-month program with Circling Europe, the SAS facilitator training. And yeah, it's just like, just seeing like how it seems to me that practice is really pivotal. And I've never come across anything else that really allows us to be really honest with what's happening with us and be very attuned. So like this element of being truthful and loving and empathetic at the same time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's simply like when truth meets attunement, transformation happens, And so circling when it goes well is such a powerful technology of change. I mean, circling, as you know, and as you mentioned before, is very messy. And so people have a whole variety of experiences in those spaces. So it's a little bit Wild Westy, can be, but it's an incredible art. I love it. I love it. I live here with Sophia Jean. I don't know if you know that, but we circle on the regular here in our little community. Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, I know that you're in Asheville and you have all these practitioners and facilitators around, and you're doing this practice, and that's beautiful. I mean, I feel like that's something that I don't really have. Like, I tend to I've facilitated a couple of sessions and stuff around here, and I attempt to do it with my friends here and there. Some of them are, more receptive, some less, but I don't have like this consistent community of like, anytime like, hey, let's just circle right now. I imagine that's a really beautiful experience to always have around.
Come and stay in our guest room.
Yeah, that would be really beautiful. And I was actually talking about this too with Brandon Graham Dempsey. We're kind of talking about kind of some of the frictions we would see in in a community that he has on Facebook, and like kind of how people would communicate. And I would just say it. I was like, listen, people need this 2-3 years of circling practice as like a foundation. So then, you have all this kind of intellectual and political and cultural conversation, but it's coming from a place of like emotional embodiment where we really know, well, what's happening here? Am I just kind of trying to find, like, maybe I want respect, like I'm looking for respect, or I felt disrespected, and that's what I'm seeking to gain, but I'm not aware of that, and I'm kind of functioning from this hurt place, and that just doesn't lead to a generative conversation.
Right. And you just described most communicative acts that are currently taking place in our culture, which exist primarily or apparently primarily at the level of proposition, but are driven by a deep kind of boiling ocean of unmet need.
Mm. Yeah, and you spoke a lot about attachment on your previous podcast on a metagame, and so I didn't want to touch too much on that, but I guess maybe I'll bring in one inquiry around it. It seems to me that what you call secure attachment with reality is something deeper than what we may call secure attachment in attachment theory. And, I think the host kind of mentioned like, through the attachment lens, kind of half a percent of 50% of people technically have secure attachment. But like when I think about secure attachment with reality, it kind of sets the bar far higher for what it means to have secure attachment. It feels like a radical trust or a surrender to life itself.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So I guess I wonder, do you think it's possible that we could have a predominantly secure attachment in our relationships, but yet don't have this kind of radical trust in the unfolding of all reality as it unfolds? And I guess this inquiry also kind of relates to what I see as kind of like an idealistic vision of spirituality and healing, where it's like every kink needs to be worked out, or any subtle layer of disharmony is seen as some kind of trauma or something that needs to be healed. I guess another way to say this is, often in like psycho-spiritual circles, we over-apply the everything is trauma lens. Like we basically over-pathologize. And like there's a couple of examples that come to mind, like, everyone has narcissistic tendencies, but not everyone has narcissistic personality disorder. We all experience anxiety, but that doesn't mean we experience it to the degree that, somebody with generalized anxiety disorder has. And, and I guess nobody has perfectly secure attachment all the time, but that doesn't imply that they have like insecure attachment, at least not through the lens of attachment theory. So I don't know if you kind of feel where I'm kind of leaning with this, and I'm just kind of wondering what comes up for you with this.
So the way I kind of understand it is that like when we have, when we measure in sort of the industry of psychology, like secure attachment, that is generally measuring like, are you securely attached within the kind of context that you find yourself in? And what like secure attachment with reality points in the direction of is a kind of like more and more fundamental security that would be present even when your context shifts or falls apart. And the reason why I kind of foreground this in my writing is because we're in a time of profound transition. And so you can create an environment in which you feel very secure and happy. And that's great. We should all endeavor for that. And we should also acknowledge that whatever circumstances we find ourselves in are in danger right now. This is a time of transformation. And so it would be wise, I think, for us to find a kind of fundamental security that might weather the storms that are coming. And to your point, secure attachment with reality, at least as far as I can tell, does not by any measure mean that you don't have very difficult, painful experiences. It just means that you're allowed to have difficult, painful experiences. It's safe to have difficult, painful experiences. Even in the past week, I've been on the floor a lot of the time, just like feeling a deep kind of helplessness, a deep despair as I kind of open my heart to the world. That's normal. Like we should become the kind of people for whom we're willing and able and to have and to trust those kinds of experiences. It's kind of like a full contact willingness to have life, this life, whatever it is. And yeah, so that's kind of my take on it. As I said in the previous podcast, it's like, yeah, I get the sense that it's not that if you're securely attached, it's a very large spectrum that goes from all the way from like severe failure of safety, like total like psychopathy, to the mind of the Buddha, right? On the other side, that's like profound kind of cosmic secure attachment, which is a term that I got from John Churchill. And so like, yeah, we can kind of break that up into secure and insecure. That might be helpful but I think it's helpful to understand that it's like a much more broad and beautiful, I think, spectrum than we typically tend to think.
Yeah, no, I'm appreciating kind of the nuance that you're bringing to this. And I'm also wondering, do you feel like secure attachment with reality requires a deeper understanding of emptiness?
I think so. Yeah, it's a great question. I think so, because a lot of it is like, we tend to think about attachment in terms of human relationships, which, yeah, like that makes a lot of sense. But I think of Robert Bea here, with one of his metta practices, loving kindness practices. He would suggest giving loving kindness to each next phenomena that arises. Whatever phenomena arises in consciousness, you kind of send metta to it. And that's kind of in the direction of this profound secure attachment, right? Like everything that arises, like it's the thing, and it's also a shining forth of like love, intelligence. And when we realize the truth of emptiness, we can kind of start to find our way into that perception, and that creates a lot of safety in the system, that everything that arises, even my pain, somehow is like love. Like that is a very safe world to be in. And it feels like, oh yeah, I can trust this for sure. It's love.
Mm. Yeah, and that sounds like a beautiful place to get to function from there.
Yeah. And it's both a kind of experience that we can have, and it's something that we can kind of cultivate. As Robert Bea says, we can take on a way of seeing, like, what's it like to look at this as if it's love, and that can kind of soften some of the rigid structures that might make our anxiety seem bad.
Yeah, it's like a way of seeing that kind of everything has a function, and a lot of times like our anxiety, our pain, different parts, knowing that you also have a lot of training with Steve March, and like there's this piece of like working with parts, and like each of those parts has some deeper intelligence to it. And often we don't see that. Like we see the surface, like this is just this anger, or like I don't want to feel the inadequacy, or I don't want to feel the despair. Like I don't want to be on the floor, but like maybe laying on the floor and like feeling into that despair, maybe there's something there that's needs to be known.
Yes, and that's that deep listening and trust, and it requires a kind of fundament of safety. But then when we can turn towards that which the kind of personality or ego structure has deemed like dangerous or bad, we can turn towards it with trust. Then, yeah, the kind of natural intelligence of whatever it is, a part, a feeling, will reveal itself. I've seen it again and again in my own process and with clients. You just, if you can find a way to turn towards it with presence and attunement, it's so magic. The intelligence clarifies and is offered to us, and then we can move forward with it. It really is in the turning away that the intelligence gets blocked, and then the suffering begins.
Like hearing you talk right now, kind of start thinking about, and, I think this is another thread that runs through your writing. But I guess, do you feel like the fundamental nature of reality is love? Is that a good way to say that?
It seems like it. Yeah,
it seems like it. Yeah,
it seems like it. Yeah. Yeah, as I ask that question right now, my heart opens, and I feel the way in which that's true. And I also feel like, I feel so much in the kind of, even though I never met him in person, in the kind of lineage stream of Robert Bea. And so there's a part of me that wants to say, like, it certainly seems like an incredibly skillful way of looking, right? And to live in the world in which everything is love, that's the fundament. I really like that. Yeah,
like I was really feeling into recently this notion that God is love, which is like something you find in Christianity, and it's like, it's like it's hard to kind of explain like what that, like how true that feels, and like what that experience is like. And I've had I've had some profound psychedelic experiences, particularly I would say with 5-MeO DMT, and I mean, they've also been like the most terrifying experiences. It's always like this deep abyss of like annihilation, and like on the other side, it's like a realization that it's like all of this is like love, and it's holding you. It's actually holding you, and you're a part of it. You're not separate from it. And and it's, that experience can be also very distant, right? Like these experiences were a long time ago, and it's like, coming out of that, it's like, wow, tears, like complete tears of like, tears for like kind of the sorrow. It's like, wow, like I've been stressed out and suffering and trying to get somewhere, and like all that pain. And then also like, wow, it's so simple and beautiful. Like it's just about love. And then, you move through the world, and it becomes kind of harder to see that. So, like being able to kind of feel into that without having to use something, and just having like some kind of practices to feel in how we're held in that way.
Exactly.
Seems vital.
It's so vital. Yeah. I think it's good to use substances if we want to glimpse this kind of thing, but we do need to learn how to do it endogenously for it to be really robust in the life. And yeah, I mean, I think like you, I mean, as you have a wife and a child, it's like to take these kinds of practices fully into this world is no joke, right? So, and I think that's part of what made me hesitate to say like everything is love, is that for me, and for I'm sure many people who are listening, it sure as hell doesn't seem like that. And so I think it's important to be kind to the situation, like the kind of the degree of suffering that we often find ourselves in. And my sense is we just will suffer. We just will. And so,
yeah, because there could be kind of like a bypassing too, in that like everything is always love, and it's like sometimes it definitely doesn't feel that way. It doesn't seem that way.
Yes. Yeah.
So maybe we'll kind of shift a little bit, and you recently had a chat with Vince Horn, on his Buddhist Geeks podcast, which really enjoyed. I mean, fascinating conversation. And, you mentioned your series on Dharma being a goodbye letter for Buddhism, and that you don't feel hopeful about Buddhist institutions evolving in a way that can address the meta crisis. So I'm curious to hear a bit more about where you feel the sticking points in Buddhism are. What is missing from Buddhism today that you feel is critical to address the meta crisis?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll say, first of all, it's funny you should mention how I framed it as a goodbye letter, because I'm teaching a 4-part series on Buddhist Geeks. So we'll see if how true that goodbye is.
Nice.
But, this month I'm teaching that. Actually, this week we'll start. Yeah, so I'm excited
Beautiful.
about that. So it was a 4-part series, and the 2 main arguments, although a bunch of different arguments that I made, because I've been in the Buddhist world for, like 20 years now, kind of wrestling with it. The 2 main arguments were, one, how it is that Buddhist practice, at least in the West, seems to allow for a kind of reification of certain avoidant attachment structures in the mind. I saw this in my own practice and with many people that I've met along the way, that we end up sort of like perfecting, actually, a kind of avoidant attachment relationship with many different dimensions of reality through practicing in the Buddhist frame. So the solution there would be something like what Daniel P. Brown has offered, or what John Churchill has offered, or I think what Dustin DePerna offers, in terms of like weaving in at the fundamental layer understandings of attachment into Buddhist practice. I think this points to the propensity for Buddhist practitioners to, kind of spiritually bypass a whole range of life. And that is profoundly not what is needed right now. In my estimation, we need a kind of profound engagement with life. The pain of life, the complex system dynamics of what's wrong at this moment. We need to actually like be in intimate relationship with that. And so that's, I think, a problem that Buddhism would need to kind of confront. And, I see varying degrees of willingness within Buddhist institutions to confront that. The other major issue I explored was around I would say our implicit religious views within Buddhist institutions, specifically the way that they kind of are trying to blend, without really talking about it, secular humanism with Buddha Dharma. And here, I'm really appreciative for my training at Maple, because this is one of the things that Soryu really clarified, is that the dominant religious paradigm on the planet right now is a kind of secular humanist materialism. That's really what the religion that is running the world and that is kind of driving the world off the cliff in this time of meta crisis. That's how we could describe it. And we could get into what that means, secular humanist materialist. But, when and my sense is that many of the most popular forms of Buddhism and many of the most important Buddhist institutions in Western culture have basically made a kind of Faustian bargain with secular humanism in order to create a form of Buddhism that could be successful in this culture. But in doing so, they sort of de-potentiated or de-radicalized the Buddha Dharma so that it lost some of its most profound transformative potential. And, the solution there is to find our way towards a kind of cosmology, a worldview, a religious vision that enchants the world, that is takes the arguments of secular humanism, responds to them appropriately, and shows us a new way forward that isn't so bound up in a kind of materialist vision of what this reality is. And that's a not insignificant task. And I don't see existent Buddhist institutions really grappling with this. And there's a lot of inertia already established. So, and as we said in the conversation, like Vince is dedicated to Buddhism, and there are many people I know who are dedicated to the evolution of Buddhism, but that's not really where my eros is. So, yeah.
Yeah. Just kind of to reflect back, like for your senses that, it's interesting because some of the things you were saying, I recently had a conversation with Jordan Hall, and it seems like that was kind of his sense of Buddhism, and like that's kind of why he went to Christianity. But it's this notion that Buddhist practice can lead to this kind of avoidance, and it seems like this is a fairly new kind of insight for you, coming across attachment and like realizing like, oh, actually it can kind of be lonely, and it could kind of perpetuate these avoidant tendencies. And then there's also this notion of there is a religious view, but it's kind of entangling Buddha Dharma with transhumanism. I don't think that's the word you use, but I think that's what you're pointing to as well. And I've spoken a lot about this with Zach Stein, and like how that's the biggest religion in the world, like the most powerful religion. But it's it's also kind of, we don't see it. We don't see it, right? It's like kind of in the background.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And this is something that Sori would often say, is that like, if you went back to the 1500s and asked somebody, are you religious? They would say, no, I'm Christian. Right. So one of the hallmarks of the dominant religion is that it gets the special place of claiming not to be a religion. And so indeed, like there's a specific variation of humanism we call transhumanism that is the operating system of many of the minds that are creating the most powerful technologies the world has ever seen. And they're embedding that mind into those tools and technologies. And that is very concerning, because it's, from my perspective, not a good religion, both in that it is not aligned with reality and that it doesn't create a meaningful, beautiful life full of intimacy and deep connection with self, other, and world. And so to build tools that then replicate that throughout the entire planetary culture would be dangerous.
Yeah. And, we kind of touched on Christianity a little bit, and I'm like, I guess I'm curious. I don't know if this is a weird question, but like, how would you describe your religion or spirituality now? Is there another wisdom tradition you're perhaps interested in? Maybe Christianity. I think you mentioned working on a project called the Church of the Intimate Web. So it sounds like maybe there's some Christian undertones in that.
Totally. Yeah. Well, so I've been in the last year and 6 months in particular, really exploring Christianity more. Me and my partner go to different Christian churches every Sunday, just to kind of get a lay of the land and check it out. This Sunday, we're actually going to Jordan's church in Swannanoa.
Oh, I was just thinking, I was like,
what's a bunch of cool folks in the community here. And I love it. I'm receiving a lot from Christianity. I've received a lot from Buddhism. I've received a lot, and am receiving a lot from certain strains of mystic Judaism. I'd love to learn more about Judaism. I love religion. I think there are so many different ways of loving God, and all of them are beautiful. So I continue to think of myself as kind of translineage or something like that. Like I think in particular, I'm aware of the ways that my training, and especially actually my training with Rob Burbea and the soulmaking Dharma, has sort of enabled me to enter into a diversity of sacred spaces and have really beautiful, kind of vivifying and engaged experiences. Like I'll go into Christian churches, and I don't think of myself as a Christian. I've never been baptized. I wasn't raised Christian, but I'll go into a Christian church. And as far as I can tell, and I think I can tell, I'm having a more profound religious experience than the Christians, many of the Christians there. I'm being more moved. My heart is being lit on fire by God and by Jesus more than many people who seem to have been going there every week for years. Why is that? I think it's because I've learned certain postures, certain ways of being in the body and in relationship that allow sacred experience to blossom. And so, I would say that my religion is something kind of close to like a mix of soulmaking and cosmorotic humanism. Like I believe deeply that we should place sacred world at the generative center of all things, that everything should be bound to a recognition of the the field of values to God, whatever you want to call it. I don't care what word you use. I care that you're actually in relationship to it, like that it moves you. And I believe that from there, we can have an infinite variety of sacred, meaningful, soulful, divine, beautiful experiences, and that we should create the conditions for that infinite, like the infinite number of sacred worlds to be born. That's what I want. And that's the work that I do with the church project. We're kind of weaving together a bunch of different lineage streams and kind of creating spaces of practice for exactly that, of like, creating and discovering sacred world together. Not like some given sacred world by like a lineage, but like this one that we create now here together.
Yeah, no, I feel so like excited hearing this, and like this notion of transdisciplinary and like kind of weaving different paths together. And I'm getting way more interested into Christianity also, and like trying to kind of like understand.
It's going around.
Yeah. I'm really curious. And I got a couple of threads that I'm following. I'm yet to read the Bible, but that's definitely on my list, and that's something I need to get to for sure.
Yeah.
And I guess like that, kind of that transdisciplinary path really resonates for me. And there is also this thread that I've been thinking about and curious about, is like, is there anything afforded by calling oneself Buddhist or Christian? Like, you're somebody that's been engaged with Buddhist practice for a long time. That's been the tradition I've been probably also engaged for the last 10 years, but I wouldn't call, I don't know if you would call yourself a Buddhist. I don't think I would call myself a Buddhist. I'm just like kind of curious, what is that? What is that identity afford? Does it afford anything, or does it, is there a limitation? Is there like a potential to go deeper in the practice, or then it closes you off from other things? Jordan is converted to Christianity. Like, what does all that mean? Kind of,
Yeah, it's a beautiful question. I mean, it's funny too, because Buddhists, I think, of all the kind of faith traditions, at least in the West, are notoriously unwilling to call themselves Buddhists. Usually you ask the Buddhists, they say, no, I don't like identities or whatever. So that's a funny thing about Buddhism as a religious tradition. And if you actually look at statistics about the growth of religions, Buddhism is just flat.
That makes sense.
In part because they're like, vaguely antinatalist, right? Like the life that they put on a pedestal is like go into the forest alone and like work out your salvation, right? That's very different than what you get in the Christian tradition, which foregrounds family as being the core of life, and so, you can run in the experiment, go into a Christian church, a vibrant Christian church, and then go into a popular Buddhist Sangha and just get a sense of the vibe difference. It's very different. It's very different. Christians are super warm, super friendly. Now, of course, the like identity question is really interesting, because like I feel myself to be deeply informed by Buddhism, increasingly informed by Christianity. I could probably call myself a Buddhist. I could probably call myself a Christian. I pray to Jesus. I, follow a lot of the things that they say are good. But would I call myself a Christian? I mean, yes, but I think when they use that term, they mean Christian and not Buddhist. Usually. Like, I'm a Christian, so I'm not a Buddhist. And that's often how identities are used to kind of carve up our culture. So, and the reason why there's such, like, if you go to Jordan's church, partly there's such a vibrant, like, scene is because they've created an in-group and an out-group. Like, we're Christians together. We're not Buddhists. That's what we're doing here. We're doing Christianity. Just straight up. And that creates the conditions for, like, a really vibrant field for whatever reason. So, I don't know, man. Yeah, as I sit with your question, I feel more and more inclined to say, like, I'm a Christian, I'm a Buddhist. I hope I'll be a Jew too. Like, I've been studying with Mark Gaffney and the kind of like his vision of cosmoerotic humanist, this kind of Solomon lineage. I would love to be a Jew. There's so much value in all of these ways. So much value. And the deeper I go into one, the more it seems to amplify the other. And so there's like a harmonic too that you can start to realize, like in and between these different vehicles, that's so profound. And then there's even the piece where like, I think you and I, and probably most of the folks who are listening to this, are in a way like deeply helplessly Christian, in that it like formed the very bedrock of like the ontic structure of our minds. If you read like, I think it's like Tom Holland's work, Dominion, it's like, it is deep, 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 deep in the kind of source code bedrock of what it means to be a mind in our culture. And so like, I'm definitely Christian in that way, helplessly. And to the degree that I'm pretending that I'm not, that's probably going to create all kinds of weird ripples and distortions in my psyche. And it's probably important for everybody to kind of get right with that core code. Not that we can't then mutate it or do all kinds of different weird stuff with it, but like, you know, it's there, like it or not.
Yeah. I mean, these sound like really important points. I mean, in my conversation with Jordan Hall, he also kind of mentioned like we're like you're saying, we're helplessly Christian. Like we can't help it. You know, the other thing about Buddhism, like being a flat line, it's like pretty hard to build community without identity. So this is really interesting, right? It's really interesting because it's almost like the identity becomes like, how could I not have an identity, or how could I have the most fluid identity? But there's like, you know, I had another practitioner, Ari Nielsen, on a previous podcast, and you know, he was kind of talking about like there's skillful ways to embody identity, and identity can kind of intensify an experience and amplify it. And yeah, and maybe that's kind of like what ends up being missed when it's like, I don't have any identity. I don't, you know, ever.
Yeah. And this is, you know, again, this is so much of what I received from Rob Burbea. And I think I could receive his teachings because he was kind of doing a radical move from within the Buddhist tradition, right? Which, as you say, is one that deconstructs identity, that's very skeptical of identity. And he was saying, and this is not like new, right? Vajrayana does this too, but I think he did this in a really compelling way where he was like, yes, and identity is a really, really important and valuable way to like play with experience and to like amplify beautiful, meaningful, sacred experience and intimacy with others in the world. And we can develop the capacity to kind of like fully, not ironically at all, embody different identities, different archetypes, different gods, different structures. And it's awesome. It's so great to be able to do that. It's so actually liberating to be able to do that. And again, not ironically, not like as a pretend, it's like real. Like when I go to a Christian church, I feel deeply Christian. I'm so moved by the theology. I'm so moved by the ritual. I'm so moved by the singing. Totally moved, totally unironically. I love it. I'm not translating it into some other system to make sense of it. I'm just going for it.
Yeah, you know, bringing up the singing, I was recently saw a video, and I don't know if it was at a church, but it seemed like they were singing some kind of a holy song, and everybody was singing it, and it was so beautiful, and I'm like, wow, like, I mean, you know, we do chanting, we do the chanting at the monastery and stuff like that, which I also appreciate, but there's just something so, I don't know. It just opens up the devotion, the singing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They know how to get that heart going. Yeah. They got like the chord progression and everything. It just works. But yeah. The Christians really nail the music as a facet of their rituals. I mean, in a way that I love Buddhist chants, but it's a different kind of thing. You know, you go to a Christian church, you're like crying in devotion. It's a blast. And it's great to do that with others. Like, it's so beautiful. And I think that's kind of the main thing is it's like, for so long, I lived where if I were to go into a Christian church, I would just be closed down, contracted. I'd be like scared. I'd be like, don't you like this is there? You know, I don't know what I would be thinking. I'd be like, you're trying to get me to believe something that's not true. I don't want to blah. You know, I'd be resisting it. It wouldn't be safe. Actually, I wouldn't have a secure attachment in that context, right? But if I can walk in, like, why not fully receive the beauty of that experience? I mean, just as you would when you're walking in a forest. Like when I walk in a forest, I want to fully receive that as a sacred experience. And that's an art, right? That's a kind of set of postures and skills, but ultimately it's an art. Can I take this experience, this religious, and make it sacred and quote religious? And man, I love doing that in all different. I haven't explored Islam much yet, but it's on my list. But I mean, it's all so good. And that's, I think, really what I want, like my work to do, and to like the church that I'm working on with my friends, is just to open people up to the just wild diversity of sacred experiences, and then people will find their way. I think that the way that people get really stuck in our current world is that they don't know how to take advantage of the beauty and goodness and truth that is on offer. And it's like we need to just get out of the secular materialist disenchanted worldview, and then we can start to see, oh my God, there's so much here. There's a banquet in this life that if I just had the eyes to see, it's like where the valueception kind of frame. It's like if I could just perceive it, if I just learn to open to it, oh my God, great. Then I can re-engage with, go check out some churches. Why not? Maybe you'll find something really beautiful.
Yeah, no, I feel very drawn to like interfaith dialogue, and a lot of what you're saying. It's like seeing God as everything and in everything, and like you could see that in the church. There could be a way of going to the church where it's like you don't feel safe and you feel contracted, and you're like, oh, they're trying to make me believe something. And there's a way of coming there and like nobody's forcing me to do anything. It's like I'm willing here, and like there might be something here in this experience. There's also something though that's interesting. You mentioned like skillfully playing with identity, and kind of that's like Robert Bay's soulmaking work, right? And even if you look at kind of Rob's trajectory, it's like he really starts with the emptiness stuff and kind of traditional Buddhist practice, and then later towards the end of his life, he's kind of opening up to this. So it seems like there's this building in Buddhism, in Dharma. It's like, and there's something like critical about the renunciation piece, that it's like, if we wanted to go to soul making or like skillfully playing to identity without, having emptiness as the base, it kind of wouldn't work.
It depends on the mind, right? And as he said in his teachings, some people just seem naturally predisposed to this kind of artful way of engaging with reality. And artists in particular seem like they have that kind of mind that can just like play with experience for whatever reason, maybe because of how they're raised. But yeah, for a lot of people, especially if you were indoctrinated, as I was, into a kind of like materialist flat world, there often needs to be a process of deconstruction and escape before you're free to play. And if I look at Christianity as a kind of tradition, I would say they aren't very good at that deconstructive, like liberatory practice. For whatever reason, I'm not totally sure why that didn't make it into the ecology of practices, but it doesn't seem like it's there from my perception so far. And so, that would be, I think, probably a skillful way of looking at it. And often there is, as I'm sure, kind of initial deconstruction, reconstruction kind of move that many, many, many people have to go through in our culture right now. But that's not to say you couldn't imagine a different culture that raises children differently, so that they're, just bright and able to move in different spaces and have sacred experiences, and doesn't instill an ideology that creates rigid and flat worlds.
Yeah, there is this notion of kenosis, which is like self-emptying in Christianity. So maybe there's something there that's kind of deconstructing or like seeing through rigid identity structures as well.
For sure. That's definitely a strain in Thomas Merton and other teachers. I think I'm more referring to the kind of living communities that I see we've been visiting every Sunday.
No, that makes sense.
But I truly don't know. I'm just beginning to become intimate with the living Christian tradition.
Yeah. I'm also kind of curious about, John Churchill's planetary Dharma.
Yeah, dude.
Because from my understanding, you're doing his program, and he has this what is a multi-year program, and you're in the first year right now.
Yep.
What's kind of been emerging there? What do you feel are some of the pieces that he's bringing, because I think you said that John Churchill's planetary Dharma is probably what you see being most close to a Dharma that's capable of addressing the meta crisis.
Yes, it seems, at least from my perspective, by far the most integrated and hopeful new vision of the Buddha Dharma that I've seen. And, from top to bottom I don't see any issues with it. I think it's incredible. The things that I'm most struck by are it's fully sort of unfolded within the explicit context of the meta crisis and the need to recover sacred world. It's built from the ground up, I think, due to his deep training with Daniel P. Brown, with a kind of integration of attachment and contemplative practice. So this idea of secure attachment with reality, that's John, in a way that's John Churchill's frame. It's a little different in my writing, but it's basically that. And I mean, it's just super solid. It's incredible, the work that he's done. I mean, even after whatever it is, 20 years of conversations and practice and thinking about this stuff and talking to people about these kinds of topics, the very first class where he kind of like just unfolded his whole vision, and set of integrated systems, I was blown away. I was like, holy crap, dude, like you are holding something extraordinary. And so, if there's, I would highly, highly, highly recommend his training. It is superlative in every way. That's the only meditation that I do now, really, is his style.
Okay. I'm curious then what is the style, and in hearing you speak about it is like also makes me want to really talk to him. I've been seeing him.
You should totally.
I've been seeing him around like on a lot of podcasts and stuff, and I've listened to a little bit, and it's just interesting because I'm functioning really from the same lineage. So I'm sure there's probably a lot of overlap in like the practices I'm doing, but I'd be curious to hear what are the meditations that you've been working with right now?
Yeah, it's really cool what he's done. So like, Daniel P. Brown developed this ideal parent figure protocol where you basically like imagine ideal caregivers offering you the qualities of secure attachment, deep support, attunement, delight, and so on. He kind of innovated on top of that and mixed it with like kind of like Dzogchen-ish practices where you, instead of imagining a figure, you instead relate to your direct experience and kind of tune into the qualities of secure attachment right there. So for instance, the two images that he uses that are the two most common ways he does this are to feel the ground beneath you and notice the stability of the ground and really let the heart open into trust of the stable ground. And then you allow yourself to be held and received by the ground. So that's one image, and you can kind of keep opening that up into like a sense of like, the earth loving you, relating to you, holding you, and deepening in trust of that. And then you can layer on top of that this image of then being in a kind of warm ocean around you and even inside your body of like loving, receptive attunement. And you just kind of like allow yourself to be held in that ocean of loving attunement on the stable ground. And your body will respond to that as in much the same way as it does to a secure attachment figure. But instead of a figure, it's
reality. Yeah, no, I appreciate you kind of giving us a taste, and for people to really get a sense, they would have to probably go work with John. But just hearing you speak about it, I definitely get more and more curious, and he's definitely trying to get a conversation in with him. I guess I kind of want to mention a couple of other things that you wrote about in regards to kind of this Dharma that's maybe like the fourth turning or what we need in today's world. And I'll mention a couple of points and see if anything pops up from that. From overcoming suffering to radical aliveness, which to me feels also like from a sutric to a tantric view, which is for me, I mean, that's a frame I came across through Charlie Aubrey, and it's been profound for me. And you mentioned I really like this one, which is like kind of two extremes. You have psychedelic parties and silent retreats. So like, what's that? Like the integration of ethics and eros.
Yes.
And you said that ethics becomes not a set of rules imposed from outside, but a natural expression of clarified desire. Really love that. And then also kind of emphasizing relationality. And these are kind of like these core pieces that perhaps we need in a fourth turning.
Yeah. Those are the ones that I'm most excited about. And the only one that John's approach lacks, as far as I can tell, but I'm only in year one, is the piece about clarified desire and the the non-distinction between eros and ethics, or eros and value. So that's something that I've received from Cosmoerotic Humanism, Zach Stein and Mark Gaffney's work. And that seems really, really, really critical. That eros, when clarified, desire, when clarified, is ethical, which is a crazy thing and runs so counter to so many things. Like so many people, so many religious traditions or religious spaces, I think, have a kind of like arm's length with desire. But the key is clarified desire. So doing the work to untangle the motivational system liberates desire as profoundly, deeply ethical.
Yeah, and that's like what's kind of maybe going underneath, what's underneath every single layer.
Exactly.
There's
exactly
the layer of like, I want success and I want all these things, but it's like the deeper layer is like, oh, actually, I just want to be loved, and it's like tapping into these deeper layers.
Right. Exactly. And then when you are able to finally, receive love in that place that is in such deep need, unfulfilled need, when it finally gets met with love, desire comes forth in a new way. And that is my sense of like what we in our lives want to build a life on, and also like what we want to build friendships on, and ideally what we want to build our culture on, because it's trustworthy in a way that these like tangled up compensation structures are just not.
So I guess maybe kind of finish up with, we both recently attended the Human Transformation in a Time of Meta Crisis event at Harvard. And, I'm curious to hear what stood out for you, any takeaways or kind of general reflections from this event.
Yeah, I'd love to hear your reflections too. I mean, it was great to see so many friends, and I think they pulled in a really eclectic network of people. Definitely the highlight, was seeing so many friends, seeing my dear friend and collaborator Cheryl's baby, and having babies there. There were a couple of babies there.
Yeah.
I was really happy that they were there. There were some good presentations. But I think what I really left with was, it's great. It felt like legitimizing, I think, to a lot of people to be a part of a conference at Harvard, which in my view is sort of the heart of the dying religion that has brought us to the brink of planetary crisis. So it's cool that they would open their space to us. And I think it reflects on the growing significance of the networks that we're a part of, and that more and more people are looking at it those spaces as being potentially important. And it's just very clear that whatever is going to emerge, whatever is going to come next, is not going to come out of Harvard. Right? Like, so all they could really do at the end of the day was point with propositions in a direction that they would like to see, or that is needed. But I don't get the sense that Harvard is going to radically transform to include non-propositional knowledge in a deep way. is not going to become a place where wisdom is truly found and propagated. And so, it's good. I felt confirmed in that sense going there, that like, yeah, good that they recognize that there's like change is afoot, but they're not the place where that change is really going to profoundly happen. In my view, I hope I'm wrong. Yeah. How was it for you?
Yeah, I guess, I'm not going to repeat what you said, but I agree with kind of all these notions of what you said. I think like this is what I'm getting is that we need more dialectical kind of conversations. We really need people with different views to come together and have conversations. And, we touched on transhumanism a little bit, and it seems like that's kind of that's like the quote unquote enemy, like you have the metacrisians and you have the techno optimists, and I think we need to get those people into conversation, and we need to understand each other better, because it's like, I don't understand transhumanism. Like, I don't get how, like I've had this conversation with Zach and other people on this channel. I don't get that functioning. Like, I don't get that view. So it's like understanding what's happening for people that subscribe to that view, and understanding how we can come into generative conversation and kind of see what else can emerge out of that. Because I think, just having more people patting each other's backs and just agreeing is not going to be the way forward.
Amen. I'll pat your back on that.
Yeah. Well, as we kind of wind down here, just want to say that really appreciate being with you here, and really could feel kind of the energy you've cultivated. It's just, I just feel held. Like I know we're not like doing like a therapy session or unfolding session, but like in this conversation, I feel really kind of held by your presence and this kind of sense of safety and resonance. And just a sense also of like, you're somebody that I'd like to keep having kind of dialogue as we walk our paths, because I feel like there's so many threads of resonance. And we've touched on so many things in this conversation, from your monastic experiences, breakdowns and breakthroughs, developing a better relationship with conceptuality and rationality. We've talked on attachment and post-Buddhism and kind of like a Dharma that can address the meta crisis. Is there anything else you want to say or mention before we close here?
I appreciate your reflection and your invitation to be here. I would say, I also hosted a podcast for 10 years. You mentioned this at the beginning, and I think an artifact of this medium is that it may be the case that listeners kind of think that I, or perhaps you, are different than they are because they're listening to a conversation that we're having. And I would just say, like, well, make it clear, I don't know what is going to happen. I don't know what's going on. I have practices that I do and that I recommend for people, but this field is so fertile. And so what's really, really, what I do believe, and what the church project that I and my friends are working on kind of puts almost at the theological ground, is I believe in the liberation of creative agency of people. And so I love these podcast conversations. I love that people listen to them. And ultimately, this is about you, right? It's about how can we reclaim our own authority in this world culture right now? And then how can we come into resonant connection with each other so that we can do something that none of us could do on our own? So it's like, I love having this conversation, and it's so profoundly not about me. So there's a kind of performative contradiction in what I stand for and, putting myself out there, which is difficult sometimes for me. And I just want to say like that. Yeah, that. I want to say that.
No, I really appreciate the humility and like the leaning into not knowing. And just what a fire way to end this conversation. Thank you so much. Appreciate you, brother.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.